Greetings to the demo on Splunk. And let me give a brief about myself. I am a certified core consultant in Splunk, which is issued by Splunk itself. I'm accredited on the Splunk Cloud Certification, Splunk Cloud Migration, as well as on the Enterprise Security. I'm highly proficient with the Splunk best practices for multi-site clustering as well as disaster recovery. I can plan, architect, and implement large Splunk installation and has expert level knowledge of multi-tier Splunk architectures, clustering, and scalability. I'm expert in data ingestion and onboarding the data, the advanced dashboard building, visualizations, and creating alerts. I have an industry experience in implementing Splunk Enterprise Security, Splunk Cloud implementation, as well as Splunk Cloud migration. So let's get into the demo, which is the focus of this presentation. The demo scope we are limiting to the Splunk administration, and which is involving the Splunk installation and understanding the components about it. The detailed course outline for this demo is as the installation of Splunk, rather understanding the basic deployment versus a distributed deployment of a Splunk instances. How do we go about creating a Splunk account, which is a preliminary requisite for Splunk installation, followed by installing Splunk at different OS, let it be Mac and Linux, and followed by the main key component of Splunk. Let's get started with the deployments. And to start with deployments, Splunk is extensible data platform which powers the unified security and protects your business with advanced analytics. It automates operation and also the end-to-end integrations applications. It can be deployed as a standalone to a high availability clusters. Simplest if of the kind is called all-in-one, or it is also called a standalone instance. There, a single host is doing everything from indexing, searching, and ingestion also. This kind of instances are used for demo and testing, and it is a very simplified implementation. But for our starts, we are going to talk about the basic deployment, which can be seen at a lot of customers' instance. And this is the deployment where similar to the standalone configurations, but it is managed using the forward configurations. Here in the diagram, you can also see that there are forwarders which are deployed. These forwarders are ingesting and forwarding the data from the different data sources, which could be the production servers of an enterprise and forward it to the Splunk server. They collect and send the data. So this is the situation when any enterprise, we got to forward army sending all kinds of data to the Splunk enterprise. With this dedicated set of Splunk server, we are feeding the entire data through the web surface, web interface, or the file system, or even through the different production system. This extra software, which we call forwarders, later on we are going to go into deep dive for that, is creating or reading the systems, reading the files from the target systems. It may also be running the scripts and then funnel the data into Splunk. Let's go and look at the other deployment, which is very prevalent in the industry. This deployment is called distributed deployment. Here, you can scale the Splunk in various way at various layers. But first, before we go about the scaling part of it, we need to understand why we are doing it. So what we do is that we are forwarding logs from the workstations or different servers, which would be Mac-based, Windows-based, or Linux-based, or any other OS-based. And now to scale it up, it is hard to manage all this stuff given the way we want the configuration to be consistent. And we have got many distinct forwarders to manage. And for this, the deployment server does its job. Here, to start with, we start adding the layers at the indexes, and these indexes are the one who are clustered and handles the more and more inputs. The forwarder configuration is managed by another instance which is called the deployment server. And if you see in the diagram, it is clearly demarcated the role of each layer in this distributed environment. You can see the forwarding layer is responsible for the entire input that of the data that is being ingested. The indexing layer is responsible for indexing and parsing, and if any transformation is required. Search heads are the instances where the end user interacts, and then the searches can be created or can be run through the search heads. So these are the two basic type of deployments that we see on-prem on the Splunk type. We'll start with a Splunk installation. It is a very simple process, and it is usually a three-step process. Installing a Splunk instance, it is available for anybody who wants to create an account and download a demo instance. There are two types of demos. One is cloud-based and one is on-prem. They both are tied up with different duration altogether, and you can take the advantage of it. The three-step process is very simple. You go to the splunk.com and click on the icon on the top right side, which says Free Splunk. That Free Splunk click will take you to a page where you have to fill out your information, email ID, and some more information, and it creates a login for you at the Splunk website. From there, it takes you to the page where it gives you an option to download the instance for cloud or Linux or Mac-based system, or you can opt to another option, which is a cloud trial. And the Splunk instance is available for installing and downloading from there. Splunk instance, creating a Splunk account. Once you have done the creating Splunk account, as we mentioned in the previous slide, you can download Windows, Linux, or Mac-based. Currently, the Mac-based Splunk instance is available more for demos and testing, but the other two OS is easily available for every type of setup. The second one is the cloud-based, and it means you can go and choose a Splunk instance which is cloud-based. It has self-service and managed service. What self-service means that you can purchase the Splunk directly, and it cannot be customized by the Splunk cloud team, but you have to manage the account yourself for the duration that you are choosing. And this is also called as self-service provisioning, where you purchase the Splunk Cloud directly from the website instead of managing, which is the second type. And in this situation, you work with Splunk sales rep, where you get to work with them to meet your requirements and build the environment which suits your need. The difference here between self-service and managed is that the managed deployment is highly customizable for your need or customer's need. And where the Splunk team, the sales team, will understand and build an environment which is absolutely and right sized to your needs. There are some prerequisites that should be kept in mind for installing a Splunk so that it can work efficiently. It is more inclined for the hardware side of it, and the host specifications for single instance deployment is based on a 64-bit chip architecture. It should be 12 CPU cores or 24 virtual CPU cores at 2 gigahertz or higher speed per core. The RAM requirement is 12 GB, and Ethernet for the connectivity is suggested to be 1 GB. And should be 64-bit Linux or Windows distribution system. As we get into different component of the Splunk deployment, the need of the RAM and the core may change depending upon the functions for it. And if you want to see the very detailed specification for the distributed deployment, whether it is specific for the indexes or specific for the search heads, you can refer to the link at docs.splunk.com. We have a detailed demo which is available of installation of a Splunk on a Linux as well as Windows environment in the training class itself. So I would request you to enroll into the class to go for a deep dive and understand the detailed steps for deploying a Splunk in a Linux or Windows environment. So just to brief you, these are the two type of installation which are presented over here. One is the Linux space, which you see on the left hand side, and the installation can be done by uncompressing the tar gz file on the path, which is opt Splunk directory, and then you can run the Splunk from it. Besides tar or gz file, it also is supported in rpm and deb file extensions. Whereas in Windows, you have MSI installer available, and the installation takes place as following the wizard steps and helps you in creating the Splunk administrator's account and the password for it. There is a slight difference between the Linux and the Windows-based installation or post-installation. In Linux-based system, the Splunk starts manually. It is not set to start automatically. And that's why it is suggested to enable the boot start of a Splunk when you actually do the installation itself. Windows has the advantage that it starts automatically. So the enablement boot path step is not required for the Windows systems. And Splunk itself provides a detailed documentation about how to go about different OS systems or different files altogether. This documentation is also available at dots.splunk.com. Once the installation is completed, we move to the web interface of the Splunk. This is the key area where most of the users will be logging in, except for the administrator, which will have more privileges and will also be responsible for configuration and administration of the Splunk. So we are going to talk in depth about the web interface, where even administrator can also work very well. Splunk is a browser-based user interface, and how to go about the Splunk if it is deployed at local, it can be as simple as URL as HTTP local and 8000 port. Otherwise, it will be the server name, the DNS name, or the IP address, and the port is 8000. By default, the Splunk port is 8000, but it gives you the flexibility to change the port in case 8000 port is engaged in some other application. Splunk also provides the front end, the web also provides a search and management front end for the Splunk D process. To understand a little bit more on the Splunk D process, the Splunk D process is the one which is responsible for the indexing and processing of the entire amount of data that comes from the various sources. The Splunk D process is also capable of handling large volumes of streaming data and indexing it for the real-time analytics over one or more pipelines. All these things we are going to see in detail in the full length of the administration course. So going from this point onwards, once you log in with your user ID and password, you can sign in. After signing in, it's going to take you to the landing page. And within the landing page, there are key tabs which are available on the web interface. Let's talk about these tabs in brief. If you see highlighted tabs, which are highlighted here, the first tab is nothing but the user. Here the user is administrator, and the option which is available for the users are to update the user settings, which are around the email ID, the name, password, and so on and so forth, and also the preference how the user want to see the web interface, how they want to see the SPL in the search bars, and also the kind of theme they want to pick it up. The time zone is also can be controlled with the preferences. The next tab, which is marked as messages, this is the tab which indicates the system generated messages. Examples are like when a new version is available, it gives a prompt in the messages about downloading and upgrading the Splunk instances. It also is also the result of the alert any which comes from any of the reports or which has been built in the system is also shown as a pop-up of the message bar. Setting is the heart of the entire Splunk instance, and we have a slide dedicated to it, so we are going to talk in depth about it over there. Moving on to the next tab, which is activities. Activities takes us through the details of the jobs that are usually generated during the Splunk searches, and also any kind of trigger alerts that are built on the searches over here. So as we said, we have in depth for the setting. We are going to look at the settings now over here. In this screen, if you see, we are going to talk about the first left-hand side of the bar, which talks about add data. So in add data, it gives you an option to add different type of data with different type of methods. It could be a simple upload file, which is good to use for one-time upload of the data, or you can configure the data from different forwarders that we spoke about in the previous slides about distributed deployments or even standalone deployments when the data is being forwarded from different universal forwarders or forwarders as we spoke about. The monitoring console is again a very key area to understand the health of the Splunk instance, and we are going to talk in depth about it in a different slide. Coming to our focus of this slide, where we talked about the settings which are related to system settings, user, knowledge, data, and distributed environments. So the system settings, this controls the behavior of the Splunk setup or the Splunk server setup. It talks about the restart, it has that capability available at it. It talks about, now the new features talks about how you can distinguish one instance from another. We can review the health reports and the instrumentation that can be done. That means the matrices around the matrices data. It also controls about the licensing and depicts the consumption data ingestion if it is exceeding, meeting, or below the licenses that has been agreed or signed for it. Workload management too. Next is important for you to understand is the user and authentication. Splunk has the capability to work on new users, provide new rules, provide access controls, or even integrating with different authentication methods through this user and authentications. Other areas that an administrator as well as end user or power user will browse is the knowledge area. This is where the entire action happens. In the knowledge area, you can create reports, you can do searches, generate alerts. You can build different data models that helps you in facilitating different searches and also building new reports and searches on it. Event types, tags, fields, lookups, they are supporting activities for your search and different data models. You can update your user interface, you can derive alert actions, and go for building macros and different configurations from the knowledge module. The data, it talks about the different data data ingestions that we also saw on the left-hand side, add data side. And it also gives you the details of forwarding and receiving depending upon the instance it is. We can create indexes through to which the data gets ingested, accelerate reports, and also review the different source style from where the data is flowing. So it's very key, or rather the entire Splunk user interface revolves or moves around the settings itself. As an end user or a power user, you may work in the knowledge area, but being an administrator, you might be working across all the 5 areas which are depicted over here. The next one, search and reporting, is a key area of the Splunk web, and the Splunk reports are nothing but the results saved from the search actions, which can show the statistics and visualization of the event. The reports can run anytime, or they can be even scheduled, and they can always fetch the fresh results every time they are run. In example, we have talked about report which is running for a specific host and giving the count of the files available on the host for the particular day at time. They are inbuilt reports, they are customizable reports, and these all are covered in the different trainings available by MindMajix. The next one, again, another key module or component as we talk about the Splunk web interface, is monitoring console. It is very, very important model for the administrators, and it is an app which is used for admin only. This is very important component because you can review the health of the entire Splunk ecosystem. And this app is used to monitor and investigate the data the Splunk collects about itself, not for the entire Splunk environment. That is dealt in the knowledge objects. But knowing that your Splunk deployment, whether it is standalone or a distributed environment, how it is healthy and how it is performing, how is the CPU and the resource usage, how are your search performing. All this data is available for administration at the monitoring console. And it has got different tabs. A monitoring console itself is a module, and how to go about it, how to build it, and how to actually ensure that you can resolve a lot of issues as an administrator by using a monitoring console. Few of the examples I can talk about is if you have to find answers to the common problem like monitoring console, that if you're a user is having a slow performance on the UI, this kind of information can be taken into the monitoring console. If the user's search performance is slow or any indexer search is up or down, and what is the state of the health of the ingestion on an indexer, what is the workload distributed across different indexes, and what are the indexes retention policy? Is the KV store initialized or not? Or are there any web errors that are because of the disk space not available? Such questions or the answers to such questions are readily available on the monitoring console for a Splunk administrator. So repeating once again, the significance of the monitoring console. It is a set of dashboards, platform alerts, and health checks, including in the Splunk Enterprise. For an administrator, this dashboard provides insights to your deployment, index performance, search performance, operating system usage, key value store performance, and also the license usage. It provides a lot of insights in many areas of your deployment or instances. For example, search performance, distributed search framework, the indexes performance, operating system resource usage, Splunk app key value store performance, the clustering of search heads as well as indexes, the volume usage, the index usage, the connections from the forwarders, a collector which is the hex over here, and the license usage. So once again, I cannot say more or less, but as an administrator, it's a very good idea to have a good hang and hold of the monitoring console. That is going to help you in troubleshooting a lot of areas while doing a Splunk administration. Moving on from the Splunk web interface, we are going to move to the different components you need to understand as an administrator. After the Splunk installation, there are few components, and what to understand those components, we need to review and recall the deployments where it has three areas. That what Splunk does, and as we saw the different layers in a deployment, first thing the Splunk does is ingest the data, and usually it is run through the forwarders. Then the ingested data is parsed, it is indexed, and it is stored. This is the indexing layer, and could be a standalone indexes or it could be in a cluster mode. And the top function which the Splunk does is it runs the search on the data which has been indexed and stored in the indexing layer. So based upon doing these three things, the components are also categorized accordingly. We see that from the data ingestion flow as well as the type of function the components Splunk component does, they are categorized into two areas. One is the processing components. The processing components, they handle and processes the data, and the processors components are like forwarders, the indexes, and the search heads, where actually the data flows and gets processed, transformed, and searched. The other area is called management components, and it does the function of the management components is to support these processing components. The management components can have the monitoring console, the deployment server, license manager, the cluster master, and the deployer for the search heads. We will talk about each of them in the turn. Talking about the first component or the first layer of the component, which is the processing layer, or rather, processing component is the forwarding layer. And this is the forwarding tier. The forwarders forward the data from one Splunk component to another. They can also forward data from the external sources to the another Splunk component. And as we see, they ingest the data from a source system and to the indexer or a indexing cluster where the data gets parsed. The forwarder also forwards the data from the source system directly to a search head in many cases. And as we go forward in different type of on-prem versus cloud, we can see these kind of cases over there. The forwarders are primarily of two types. I have listed three over here, but currently the active available forwarders are universal forwarders and heavy forwarders, though the light version is also available, but it will be deprecated very soon. The universal forwarder is a lightweight and performs a singular function to forward the data from source or the host to the Splunk instance. And they just forward the data from where you can tell them to the data to the place where you tell them to. Universal forwarders are easy to install, and universal forwarders are the most common type of forwarders that are installed. They suffices for the most of the situation, and for the exceptions, the heavy forwarders come into pictures. So heavy forwarders are nothing but a full installation of the Splunk enterprise. And they not only forward the data, but also parses the data before they forward. And that's the advantage of the heavy forwarder. They can also be used to route the specific data to the specific destination. They also have the capability to transform the data where as needed for an organization. To quote an example over here, sometimes when you would need a credit card data from a customer that needs to be masked before it is forwarded to the Splunk indexing layer, you can use a heavy forwarder and mask the data before it is transmitted to the indexing layer itself. The next component is the indexer. The indexers does indexing of the data and storing of the data. The indexers work as standalone as well as in a distributed environment. Whereas in a distributed environment, each indexer resides on a dedicated machine. They can be clustered or standalone, as I referred. The cluster indexers are also known as peer nodes. And if you want to do the load balancing on the indexing duties, you can do the clustering of your indexes. The search head, that's the next component. The search head manages the search requests which comes from different users. The search head distributes the search across the indexes. They also consolidate the result for the indexes. And the search head is the instance of Splunk where user interacts with. Now we move from the processes component to the managing component and talk about the one of the managing component, which is the deployment server. The deployment server It manages any number of instances which are called the deployment clients, and a deployment server is a centralized configuration manager. A deployment server also manages the deployment of apps for its clients, and all these configurations can be done through the forward management interface of the Splunk instances. Just to give you a few examples, that the deployment server, it always interacts with the forwarding layer to transmit or forward any specific app that is required on the forwarding layer. But in some situations where there are standalone search heads, a deployment server can also be used as a configuration management tool. If it is a clustered environment, it is a different server or a different instance which is deployer used, as well as the deployment server can be used in a standalone indexes for configuration management. But when the indexes gets clustered, the cluster master has a role to forward the apps to the indexes in that case. The license manager. The license manager centralizes the license manager and the license management. The clients which are tagged to the license manager are called license slaves. A license manager manages the license pools and the stacks that are available. The components to which other components look to is nothing but the license manager, and they also validate if the license is valid for those instances and if the quota of the license is meeting as per the agreement or exceeds, and triggers the alerts accordingly. The next component we are going to talk about is cluster manager, and it is called indexer cluster manager also. The job of a cluster manager is to manage the indexer cluster. That means when the indexes are no more standalone, they are in a cluster. That's where the index cluster manager roles comes into play. It coordinates the activities within the cluster of the indexes. It manages the data replication, and the cluster master or cluster manager, it also manages the bucket that is the storage for the cluster. Any kind of update that comes for the cluster is also handled by the cluster manager. The next component that we are going to talk about is deployer. I specifically mentioned search head cluster deployer. And when the search heads are deployed in a cluster, it's the cluster manager, cluster head, search head cluster deployer comes into the play. The deployer manages the baseline and the apps that have to be deployed to the search head cluster member. The deployer's role is only to manage the cluster of the search heads and nothing beyond that. It can help in scaling the Splunk on the search side, and deployer by itself is not a member of the cluster. Now we have understood a lot about the various components of the Splunk, and now there's something very important for you to understand. Yes, that's right, that every Splunk component is built using the Splunk Enterprise. That means technically the installation of every Splunk component is same. The differentiator factor, which defines that very specific component, is defined by its configuration. And when we want to install a license manager, indexer, cluster master, or search head, they all are deployed as Splunk Enterprise. And when, how do they differentiate is depending upon the configurations that are built onto it. There's only one exception, with the exception is for the universal forwarder, which is nothing but a different instance. Slightly different method is used for to deploy it also. So that's the only different component as far as the building of a Splunk component is involved. This brings us towards closure of the content of this demo. But besides in the administrator's course, we not only have a deep dive for the administrator, but we also have different projects that you will be giving hands-on. You'll be given an opportunity for the hands-on to install the Splunk. You can install the Splunk on local or cloud, and you will be also given the project to identify the setting of the Splunk web, which is very key for a Splunk administrator, and different ways of restarting the Splunk itself. The lab step, there are certain prerequisites where a high-speed internet is required. It can be a desktop or a laptop or a cloud. What is the minimum specs required for the system is mentioned at docs.splunk.com, or we can provide during the session. And the installer is available at splunk.com, which we can help you in how to build the account and then download the installer based on your needs and your system. There are a lot of additional course resources available. Few of them are listed here. Once you create an account, most of the course resources from the Splunk and the Splunk community is available, besides the course resources that will be provided by the MindMajix also. We also help you in preparing for the mock interviews by giving you sample questions, sample situations, the real life examples for the administrator, the real life kind of close to data that the administrator would be working, the different type of systems you would come across, as well as the different type of data ingestion you would be required on. So we will also walk you through, help you in preparing the certification for the Splunk Enterprise Certified Administrator. There is a path available at the Splunk website itself, that how you can go about it, what are the courses that are required as optional. Otherwise, this course, which is provided by MindMajix, suffices the purpose of the required courses by the Splunk. And then we can help you for registering for the certifications and followed by the certification altogether. That brings us to the closure of today's demo. Thank you all for attending the demo. And it's very important that we hear your feedback, and that helps in improvising our course content as well as our technique of imparting the demo. So we would look forward and to receive your feedback, and feel free to contact us on any queries, whether it is related to the course or whether it is related to the demo, at info@mindmajix.com. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.